Hey everyone, welcome to the Authenticating Intelligence podcast. My name is Dr. Stephen Aguilar. I'm an associate professor of education at the University of Southern California Rossiter School of Education, and I also co-direct USC Center for Generative AI in Society. I'm joined today by Dan O'Brien, former animator for feature-length animated films. Welcome, Dan.
Hello, thanks for having me.
I know that, the role of an animator and when we're thinking about feature-length animated films, it's a team effort. So would you want to dig in a little bit more in terms of what your actual role was when we were thinking about the animation process?
Sure. I worked for a company called Blue Sky Studios, and we're most famous for doing the Ice Age movies. And I also worked on movies such as the Peanuts movie, Horton Hears a Who, Spies in Disguise. There's a
Nice.
bunch that people might not remember, like Robots was one.
I remember robots.
And my job was, I was called, I was called a lighting lead. And what that basically is I was a team leader and I would set the look for different sequences of the film
Hmm.
and then lead a team of artists where all the shots would need to kind of match each other so that they didn't have that sort of like staccato, sort of like that look of like a ransom note where the letters don't match. So you want everything to kind of look like, oh, this was filmed all on the same day at the same time. And it takes a lot of work to get all the shots to match. So, people often, I'm not going to go into a great amount of detail about this, but people would often be confused about, well, what is lighting for an animated film? And I would try to explain that it's basically it's simulating what's happening on a live action film where you position lights and you try to shape the characters in a certain way and achieve a certain mood. I would say 98% of the time people did not get what I was saying, but
Sure. Yeah.
I tried. But yeah, it's basically you're using lighting to create a mood and kind of an atmosphere, time of day, to draw the eye to certain parts of the frame. It is more artistic than you might initially imagine it being.
Yeah.
And if you were to see like a film frame that just used generic lighting versus one that was art directed and you were kind of trying to achieve a certain effect, it makes a huge difference. And you can often see this effect if you look at like an amateur film
Hmm.
where they don't have really a budget for good lighting, and it's a huge difference between a professional production that has that sort of cinematic look versus something that where the lighting is flat, it's boring. So yeah, it's really about making the film look a certain way.
Yeah.
That was my job.
That makes sense. And that I feel like that's something that people do take for granted, right? Because when you're out in the natural world, either it's artificial lights from your office or you're out in the sunshine as long as it's daytime. So we take light for granted, but that doesn't mean that we're not always like reading light and reading light's intentions, right? Like even if you give a kid a flashlight and they like put it under their chin, that's a different kid than if they shine it from
Yeah,
above their head, right? If it's in a
right.
dark room. And when you're telling ghost stories, that's the trope. You get the flashlight put it under your chin because that creates this atmosphere of tension or this scary moment, or you just look weird. And the fact that and that's live action, right? But when we're thinking about how that works in the animated, I think that you described what you do pretty well, which is, well, it's a team of people doing it. So we have to make sure that there's coherence around this process so that it's not like one scene is lit one way and then another scene is lit another way. Because out in the real world, you just make sure that your lights are set up the same or your same time of day, presumably. But yeah, like that, I think all of that stuff is super important. It's always just nice hearing that, people are focused on that technical aspect of creation, because we do take for granted the fact that it is much more complicated than we think it is.
Yeah.
Um, so
And
thanks for getting into it. Go ahead.
because I was working on computer animated movies, it's they're really a lot closer to a stop motion movie than they are to a 2D animated movie.
Hmm.
It's just that in a stop motion film, like let's say like the Aardman films, for example, or Nightmare Before Christmas or something like
Yeah.
that, uh, where they're building physical models miniatures. We are doing essentially the same thing as just in the computer.
Hmm.
So we do the same thing where we rig characters that move a certain way. It's very similar. It's just that one's digital and one is in the real world.
Yeah, no, that's a great way to think about it. And you have to create this digital light source, just like you would create have a lamp, like light your scene a certain way. So that makes
Right.
total sense to me.
Yeah.
And I think that's a good segue into the sort of this first thing that I'd like to get into, which is the notion of tools and sort of their role in the act of creation and the act of the arts, and sort of in your own, I guess, professional world when you were focused on this a lot. What were sort of the tools of the day? What did folks actually end up using like day to day? You mentioned sort of digital environments, but what were some of the popular tools that folks use to make digital animation?
Well, at my studio, the primary software we use for animation was called Maya, and that's really, I think, the most commonly used animation software out there at least at the moment. But my department actually used a proprietary software that was developed at my studio, and the guy who created that won an Academy Award for it. Actually, it was very advanced for its time.
Yeah.
Now it's sort of it's a dinosaur now, but at the time it was really cutting edge stuff, and it was a very unique tool in that there was no GUI.
Okay. No
You had
graphic
to
user
do
interface.
you
Yeah.
didn't yeah you didn't have an interface. You had to do everything by just essentially coding. Like you would create definitions of lights, and then you could do a render and an interactive render and change things and see what they looked like. That was that a lot. Some people never got the hang of doing it that way. The benefit of doing it that way, it's very light. You don't have this whole scene with all the
Mm.
memory loaded in your computer. And there's benefits and drawbacks. The drawback was if you had to position a light very specifically, that was hard to do because you couldn't literally see where the light
What it
was.
was doing, sure.
Yeah, so but you could see what it was doing. You just couldn't see the light itself, like in the way you could
Oh,
see,
interesting.
like if you were on a movie set, you could see, oh, the light's over there. You could just see what the light was doing, if that makes sense, in the render.
Yeah, versus where you're describing is it's sort of like you would have to abstract where you think it you would have to sort of infer the consequences of placement,
Yeah.
and then at that point hope you cross your fingers and hope you're right and just kind of like basically calibrate. And I imagine folks got good at it after a while where there was less error. But I don't know, is that accurate? Did folks just get like did folks sort of become like these savants that just knew how to code the right lighting source and just kind of it worked?
To some extent, yeah, it did work sort of like that. We had the option as well of opening the scene up in Maya. Now we couldn't light it in Maya, but you could at least see the scene that
Mm.
way, and you could find it. You could like kind of position an object very specifically in Maya and get the coordinates of that object and copy that into your scene. That was a rather cumbersome process, though, to do it that way.
Yeah, and I think thinking about cumbersome processes and think fast forwarding now to things that are happening today. I know that you're not necessarily plugged into the space, but you obviously still talk to folks who are actively doing this stuff. But when it comes to now this advent of generative AI technologies, and there's been a lot of pushback from basically all the creative fields that I know about have pushed back on it for in some way. And some of those, I think, in my opinion, some of that pushback has been apt, and we do need to push back, but some has been felt a little bit knee jerk. But before we get into that, I guess, what are, based off of your familiarity with where things are going, what is AI doing to that world that you inhabited professionally when it comes to animation?
Well, I would say at the current moment, it is not has not taken things over. People have not been laid off in great numbers because of AI. At least not yet.
Mm.
There's this guy Jeffrey Katzenberg, who is one of the founders of DreamWorks Animation. He predicted that within 3 years, AI will replace 90% of the artists on animated films, which of course freaked everyone out. I
Yeah.
don't know whether that will be true or not. a lot of the time the AI tools don't really deliver what people assume they're going to be. They kind
Hmm.
of assume like, well, I'll just tell the AI, oh, do this, and then it'll do it, and it's done. And oftentimes that's doesn't quite work that way. What AI is doing a lot of it this at the moment is sort of boring tasks that people didn't want to do anyway.
Yeah,
So,
like
for
what?
example, it can do something called rotoscoping, which is where basically
Mm.
it's drawing an outline around things. So for VFX movies, like you know any movie that has a lot of the Marvel movies, for example, where there's a lot of effects, they have tools now that are a lot better at picking the outline of an actor in a movie frame and isolating that so that you can put it over a different background, for example.
Okay.
It can take something that it's a lot of manual labor, and even though they film these things in front of green screens, a lot of the time the human being needs to go in and do quite a bit of work by hand to
Oh, interesting. I
clean
didn't
up
know that.
the edges. Yeah, I mean, people spend it's very mind-numbing work. People spend hours and hours and hours, and now you can get a very good result with AI. I don't know if it's completely replaced humans in that regard, but I think that there is going to come a time where you can do most of that work in AI, and it's the type of thing where nobody really wants to do that work. They're
Yeah.
doing it because it's a foot in the door.
Right.
And the thing is that the people are worried about is, well, now that there might come a point where there isn't that foot in the door, and then how do
Mm.
you get into the industry if there isn't an entry level position, because that has now been taken by AI. What is a young person who's just graduated from college going to do?
Yeah, no, that's interesting, and I do want I definitely want to return to that point, but first I want to sort of linger on this notion of rotoscoping and the tedium of it, because based off of my understanding of it, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is like if you take if you look at sort of those old Lord of the Rings cartoons, like the animated films that were the Lord of the Rings, like those are actors that were filmed, and then someone went in and frame by frame basically traced out and drew over the people. Is that
Right.
and that's
Uh,
the idea, right?
yeah,
Except,
I'm right.
go
In
ahead.
this particular usage, I'm more talking about it to make what's called a mat, which is just
Mm.
it's basically a thing that's used to cut an image out. I don't know if you're familiar with like an alpha channel, like in Photoshop. But it's where you're saying this part of the frame is clear and this
Oh,
part is
sure.
opaque.
Yeah.
That's the rotoscoping I'm talking about, which is where you have a film footage that's changing every frame, and you're essentially drawing an outline frame by frame. That's the rotoscoping in question,
And this
not
would happen
the
by hand? Like someone would basically like trace what they wanted to be opaque versus transparent by hand, frame by frame?
yeah. Well, I mean, it was kind of by hand. They would typically use you'd create shapes with. It's a little hard to describe, but it's if you've ever used Illustrator or some kind of tool that has spline curves and
Hmm.
stuff, that's really what they were using for that. Uh,
Okay.
and
So not necessarily tracing things over and over, but sort of this intermediate step of doing something that's tedious like repeatedly, but the tedium wasn't necessarily tracing, was creating all these little intermediary steps to make sure that the right things would stay in frame. Is that an accurate way
yeah,
of
well,
putting it?
it's right. It's if you've ever seen, uh, how do I put this? If you just take a green screen and use just the green screen on its own to subtract the background and put the figure over a different background, the edges tend to look. You can tell like that wasn't you know that this is
Yeah.
composited. You
Yeah,
can
yeah, yeah.
tell. So the goal with the rotoscoping is to clean up those edges to the point where you can no longer tell that the person wasn't
Gotcha.
really. It kind of gives you the green screen gives you a head start, but it doesn't really take you all the way there.
Gotcha. And now you're saying that the sort of the new AI tools that are coming out at least get you there, even get you to a more workable solution faster, so that
Yeah,
there's less tedium involved. Is what I'm
yeah,
hearing from you.
exactly.
Okay.
Yep. I mean, I don't work in that field, so it's just more what I've heard, what I've read.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I my guess is that it's not like 100% there, but it's getting there, and it's making leaps and bounds just over the last couple of years.
Yeah, and I guess now's a good time to sort of return to that point you were making, which is not just a point that's true of sort of animation and of that process, but of across professional fields, which is this idea of, well, what AI does really good, or what AI does really well, is take some of that tedium away. Like there's a lot of very basic functions that for example, in my field, like as a professor, like there's a literature review. Now, AI cannot do a perfect literature review. I would never say that it can, but it can get you somewhere, right? It can get you from a blank page to something workable that you refine over time. Now, as someone who's been doing this for a long time, I can decide, well, it's missing these components. I have to pull in this other literature. I have to clean up these things, and I can get it to where it's better fast. But, as a and typically I would potentially want my graduate student to do that, or I would have some sort of novice or an apprentice or someone within that's in an apprentice relationship do some of that sort of. I don't want to call it grunt work because it's still intellectual labor, but it's still not fun work, right? It's still something that's not enjoyable. But this notion of if you sort of take that foundation away, then what's left, right? How are folks who are new going to learn the ropes? How are they going to get to the point where they can do more sophisticated things faster? And outside of this example of rotoscoping, have you heard sort of rumblings in the creative fields that you're affiliated with of this sort of being a real concern that folks have?
Yeah, I mean, people are definitely concerned that, they have the new generative video coming out where some of it looks quite good. I mean, um, they can do footage where people have a hard time telling, is this real? Is this AI? And there's a real concern that people who work in VFX who might be doing an explosion or doing, whatever effect for like an action movie, that they might just decide to use AI for that, not a person. So there's a lot of concern. I would say it's not to the point yet where they can actually replace people with it.
Mm.
There needs to, well, for one thing, even when there have been commercials made using AI, it it takes a lot of human labor to get those to the point where they can be shown, because the raw product is doesn't like uh it's not up to snuff.
Yeah.
So takes a lot of massaging. The One of the big problems with the AI tools is where you want to iterate something and you want to be like, okay, I
Hmm.
like all this, but just this part right here, just change this little part. And that has gotten better than it was, but it's I think with video especially, it's not quite to the point where it is as directable as a filmmakers would need it to be. So you're kind of rolling the dice each time, and it's like
Right.
you had
Yeah.
something that was 95% of the way there, and you're like, okay, well, okay, we're almost there, and then the next thing that's output is now 5% of the.
Yeah, yeah, just misunderstood you. Yeah, no, I've anyone who's messed, I think, with any of the generative AI tools and created some images. I like ChatGPT used to be terrible at this. I think Google's sort of image Gen AI has been a little bit better. At least I've noticed. I've used it. Chances are parts of this thumbnail for the video will be used to. I'll use sort of Gemini's engine to create some of that imagery, but you can tweak it. But there's a difference between like, hey, change this color versus, hey, change, the position of this, artifact. And then it's like, well, how's this a completely new thing I came up with based off of some other biased thing I thought you meant? And that's frustrating. That actually loses time. Like the
Right.
act of creation becomes tedious because you're not actually creating anything. You're directing a non-sentient sort of artifact generation machine to get you, it's something that you could hypothetically, talk to a designer and be like, hey, can you just make that guy's sweater blue? And they're like, yeah. And they'll make it blue and everything else is the same. Whereas if you tell Gen AI that, he might not be wearing a sweater anymore. He might be wearing
Right.
like pants as a sweater or something dumb.
Yeah.
So that like I totally get that. But obviously these are some of the things that are potentially troublesome, some of the things that are um potentially exciting. But for your own work, I like when you're thinking about sort of um some of the more recent stuff that you've been working on. What do you think about AI? And feel free to like, why don't we dig into that a little bit? What are you working on these days that you're excited about?
Well, I decided to sort of take a break from working, partly because I felt like the whole industry was in this great state of upheaval. And I sort of didn't want to be in a situation where I was like riding a surfboard down an avalanche, so to
Right,
speak.
sure, yeah.
And I thought, you know what, I'm just going to take some time and work on some personal stuff. I have enough savings that I can just live off of those for a while.
Hmm.
So I just decided to do that, and what I've been focusing on lately is role playing games, and specifically, there's a game called Call of Cthulhu that I've been working on writing scenarios for, and it is not really a thing that is ever going to make me a lot of money, but it is something that I wanted. It's really a hobby, but it's something I want to do, and I
Yeah.
have been enjoying it, and I feel creatively fulfilled by it in a way that I typically did not by my work for a big movie studio.
Before we get into the details of it, let's just take a step back. And for folks unfamiliar with Call of Cthulhu, what's like what's the elevator pitch for what this world is, and what do you do in an RPG in that space?
So Call of Cthulhu it's a tabletop role playing game. So if you're familiar with Dungeons and Dragons, that's another tabletop role playing game. So it shares some things in common with that, in that you roll dice to determine outcomes of things. For
Yeah.
example, the theme of it is quite different. It's essentially a paranormal investigation game. So it's a bit like the X Files.
Yeah, yeah,
That's
of course
that
I
is
know
now
the
becoming
X-Files,
a
yeah.
dated reference, but
I think they're
for
rebooting it, so maybe not.
oh,
Maybe
okay, well, maybe it's
the youngins will be able to
yeah,
know what we're talking about soon.
yeah. So it's a bit like that, where you are an investigator going to investigate some weird thing. It is a horror game, and it's one where the characters that you play are just regular human beings, and there's typically a fairly high rate of people dying or going insane.
Hmm.
So there's a different expectation. It is not unlike Dungeons and Dragons, which is kind of a power fantasy game. That's not what Call of Cthulhu is.
Yeah, no, we've had the chance to play at least a couple of Call of Cthulhu games together, and it is definitely a different vibe, right? Call Dungeons and Dragons is I've spent the time to make my character into some sort of a badass. Like I get to define how cool he is or she is or they are, but it either way. Chances are they'll have cool spells, or they'll be able to interact in the world. And like you said, it's this power fantasy of being able to take actions that you would not normally be able to take, like throw a fireball into a room.
Yeah,
Sometimes you want to do that, but you have to do that in D&D instead of real life. But Call of Cthulhu is totally different, where it's like I'm a regular ass person, and there's some weird stuff going on. Maybe I have like a gun, but chances are I don't even have a gun. I have like a flashlight, and I'm gonna go see what's up. And the level of sort of mortal peril, I guess, is the best way to describe it, is much different, because it isn't the case that you're just a beat cop going to bust a robbery. It's like, no, you're just some investigator. Maybe you don't even do this for a living. You could just be like a reporter. You see something weird. It ends up being a cult that's serving some sort of weird malevolent deity that actually does have superpowers. And now what are you going to do? So it's totally, and and it gets to be a little weird, and it gets to sort of, I don't know, like I enjoy it for different reasons. Um, but yeah, so you've entered into this space of sort of not just playing these things, but creating them. So I know you and I have had sort of a few other conversations about, well, sometimes you can, one of the things that you're supposed to be able to do with AI is rapidly iterate, like create some art, some resources potentially that, or maybe even some art. But what has been your experience in sort of either trying to incorporate AI, or what's been the pushback? What have you seen?
Well, I have used AI for temporary stand-in art. I do all my own art for the games, but it is the art that appears in the games is all done by hand. The community in general is, I mean, this is not hyperbole. They are violently opposed to the use of AI, and I mean, well, the language is violent. I don't think they're not actually going to
They're
tar
not
and
getting out
feather
pitchforks.
anyone,
Yeah, yeah.
right? But metaphorical, pitchforks and torches for sure. They don't want to see AI artwork and stuff. And the place where I'm going to be selling my games has a no AI policy. You can't. You basically, well, you can't use generative AI for stuff.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, so when I'm doing the actual artwork, it's all by hand. I and not only that, I take steps now that I didn't used to take, which is that I document proof that this is my actual artwork.
Wow. How do you
I
do that? Like, what is
well,
it?
typically I create a time lapse to show the creation of the image, like bit by
Wow.
bit.
Yeah, yeah.
I just do that by hand. There's software out there that lets there's a program called Procreate where you
Yeah.
can, that's just a feature where you can enable it. But unfortunately, what I'm using doesn't have that. So it just takes me manually outputting a series of frames and then manually making them into a GIF, just so that I can say like, well, look, I made this.
Here's the creation process,
Yeah,
right?
this is
Here's the
right.
sketch. Here's the it's exactly.
Yeah, and I'm also leaning more towards like a style that looks like it was done by a person. I think before I was trying to do something that was very polished looking. I don't think anyone would mistake it for AI, but it looked more like AI than the stuff that I'm doing now. In
Okay.
that I was going for kind of an airbrushed look
Yeah,
before,
very smooth
but
transitions, maybe,
yeah,
or yeah.
but the airbrushed look, that's the thing that AI does the best, right? And so,
Hmm.
in the same way that when photography came out, painters moved away from that
There's
sort of the
realism.
photorealistic look
Yeah.
because they wanted to do something that only a human being could do. So my artwork has moved away from that basically for that reason. I'm very vigilant about always making it clear to people that this was done by hand. It was
Yeah.
not, it's not using AI. But I have played with AI. I mean, I've produced some artwork that I'm calling it artwork, but I was very pleased with that I had done as like a temp version. And I probably would have been happy to use it in a different world where this wouldn't have gotten
Like a band or
that where I
whatever,
wouldn't have
or
been
yeah.
shunned by the
Right.
community if I'd used it. Maybe I would have gone ahead and done that. But as it is, I am not going to take the risk. And also, it's like I'm proud of my artwork, so I want to
Yeah.
put my actual artwork out there, and I want it all to be in my style. And when you're using AI, you just kind of take what you get to some extent. You can try to
Hmm.
direct it, but it's kind of going to do. It's kind of like it's drawn in certain directions, and you can try to pull it away from that direction, but it's always kind of like, so that there's a sense of like gravity where it's pulling it towards that thing. Like for example, it likes to do things that are symmetrical. And if you're trying
Mm.
to create an image that's not symmetrical,
Good
you
luck.
you
Yeah.
find that you'll say, okay, well that's almost good, but I don't want it to be symmetrical. And then you can, through great effort, you can get it to pull away from that. But then if you keep working that image, it pulls it back towards that again. It's very frustrating.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
that's it. That's super interesting. I actually haven't even thought about that as a consequence. This idea that everyone always talks about, AI art isn't real art, people who can't prompt their way into being artists. And I generally am sort of, I'm okay with that language. I think that that's sort of, it's important to sort of draw a line in the sand and say like, well, the act of creation requires a more active hand from the artist rather than typing in something into a machine that sort of generates an image or generates a video. Now, whether or not that matters when we're thinking about commercial applicability is a different question, right? You can not be an artist and still sell a thing. So I think that's a tension that we can return to in a second. But this idea that you as a sort of as a trained artist have actually shifted your own aesthetic a little bit just to make sure that it doesn't read as AI, I think is a super interesting like just consequence I hadn't even thought of, like in terms of and I feel like it you're not the only one that's done that. Like I even in my own like I've shared a few images with our friend group about like I paint miniatures and like I've and it's for different reasons, but I've also shied away from ultra smooth transitions.
Mhm.
Um, Mostly because I can't do them, but even if I could do them, like I feel like I feel like I want anything that I spend time with to be very clearly like inhabit a perspective. Like I did it, here's what I wanted to do. And I feel like the more smooth and the more sort of perfect and symmetrical a thing is, often this isn't always the case. You can still be artistic in sort of this world of the perfect, but often you sort of lose, I think, what the sort of the rawness. It's almost like I don't know, I don't care what genre of music you listen to, but it's sort of like the first couple albums from that band that you really like, and then they get super commercial, and
Mhm.
then they lose some of that grit, and you're like, I still like it, but I like that first album the most because it like had this raw perspective, and I feel like
Yeah.
I don't know if is that an accurate characterization of what you're thinking about?
It is because of the nature of AI, where it is trained on this vast quantity of training data,
Hmm.
and that has a kind of a homogenizing effect to it.
Hmm.
And I saw once somebody had put up side by side. This is a collection of photographs of elephants, and these are a collection of AI images of elephants. The photographs had a great amount of variety to them, and then the AI ones all looked incredibly similar, even though they were not the
Hmm.
same prompt and not made even necessarily by the same AI generator. They all looked very similar because they all had been kind of like put into, it's like they were put into a blender, and you get this
Yeah,
very
you get
sort
the
of,
soup of elephant. Yeah.
yeah, that, and it takes a bit of the sort of, a human being might go to a place and see an elephant and be inspired, and take something that's really kind of off the wall, a photograph that's very artistically interesting,
Mm.
and it would, but an AI is not going to do that,
No, and it
you know.
can't even like. Well, you could try to get it there, but like you said, you're constantly, and this is just a function of how like large language models work and their analog and image generation. Is this idea where you have a vast training set, it's always pulling you toward like the mean, the average, by design, because the average is generally pretty good.
Yeah,
It does it for a reason.
right.
But in my view, and I think I would hazard to guess most people who are listening, like the things that really sort of change your perspective on things aren't like the average thing that you just watch on TV. It's something that sits at one of the poles, and it just really triggers something else, right? It's that song that's weird for whatever reason, or it's that piece of like that piece of writing that you read that just is so stylized that it's interesting. Um, and there's a reason why I guess this is potentially overstating the point, but I don't care. You have like it's kind of the reasons why teenagers like have this really weird exploratory phase of like wearing weird shit, listening to
Uh-huh.
weird things, because they're trying to figure out what their identity is. And I think that it's when for artists and for people who are creating things, seeding some of your identity over to AI can be dangerous, right? Because you
Yeah.
end up not having one, and that's bad.
Yeah, I think it's especially dangerous if you're doing it at the very start of your artistic journey. You're being homogenized right out of the
Mm,
gate. I
mm-hmm.
think that's probably going to be a bad thing for art. There's also evidence that as AI becomes more and more common just on the internet, that AI has started training on other AI images,
Yeah.
and it really starts to degrade the quality as it does that. So yeah, it's like it's almost like it's like recycled material in a way, where you can, if you recycle something again and again, you get a worse results each time.
Yeah, there's only so many times you can reheat food before it doesn't taste like food anymore. Like I
Yeah,
feel like that's, obviously people should eat their leftovers, but this idea that you can kind of keep iterating on AI to get something unique, I think is at least in the in the current state of technology, something that just isn't. You don't. It actually wastes more time. Sometimes it's better to learn the basics of what you would like to do, and almost iterate on the back end, right? And I know that you've done this since in some of your art. Like here's an image. Let me now add my identity to it, right? But
yeah,
even that, I think, like returning to sort of your creation of this Call of Cthulhu module, like even that is banned. So how do you what's your thought on sort of this sort of absolutely no AI in this space, even if you add your own artistic interpretation, and you're trained, so it's not like
yeah,
it's just it's not like it's trivial. You've made it yours, but that's not okay. How do you feel about
yeah.
that?
I don't blame them for taking that stance because it's sort of like you have two levels here. There's the corporate level where this is a business that's running this site
Hmm.
and they have made that decision. And then there's the community level. Both of them are against the use of AI. And I can see on both sides I can see why. I feel for the most part the same way. I don't take quite as absolutist a view as a lot of people do. But I do know just from being on the internet that there are people out there who would produce 20 uh, game modules a week using
Sure.
AI and put them on on this site. And not only would they not uh, try to go in and add that personal touch, but I think in most cases they would not even read the what they had output. They're just going to
Hmm.
create this thing, dump it on there, and you're going to end up with just an ocean of slop
Yeah.
on the site.
Yeah.
And it really is sort of like a thing where it's like if you let the foot in the door, then it is really going to be a big problem. So I get why they take this very extreme approach to say like none allowed at all is the idea, and it's not just for art; it's also for the writing
Right.
and
Sure. Yeah.
and for the editing. And now I would not use something that was written. I've tried to have AI write things. It's the same effect where it produces something that's very bland. It
Hmm.
always well, there's a combination of two things. One is it always chooses the most obvious metaphor or the most obvious description that's very generic sounding.
Yeah.
The other is that it is just saying things that and kind of like if you don't think about them, it's like it kind of sounds like something that someone might write, but if you think about it, you're like, well, this doesn't actually mean anything. It's just kind of empty.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would not use AI to write something, but I have found that it can be useful just to say, like, if I feel like I have sort of writer's block and I
Hmm.
need to write a paragraph, I might have AI write a paragraph and then read that. And then somehow having read that, it makes it easier for me to just write my own paragraph. I'm not copying what it said or anything. It just, there's something about it that's like unblocking whatever it was that
Yeah,
was,
that makes sense.
yeah.
Yeah, no, for sure. Because I think that I haven't quite done it the same way, but what you're describing is something that I think I've done. Like I haven't reflected on it, but if you have AI create a thing, one of the multitude of responses you could have is like, well, that's dumb. I don't like
Hmm.
that. And then immediately, at least my what I want to do is like write the thing that makes sense, right?
Yeah.
Your thing that whatever, pick your AI tool of choice, created something that's just not right or is really wrong. You're like, well, I could do better. And now you have a point to start. So it's almost this antagonistic relationship, like the generative AI is like the red shirt team or whatever that just give you something that you're like, well, let's do something better, you all.
Yeah.
Um,
And I've used also AI to bounce ideas off of. I discovered at a certain point that this was very dangerous to do, especially with ChatGPT. I found
mm,
that Claude is much better at this.
hmm.
And I had mostly stopped using ChatGPT for stuff like this. because of its tendency to do what they call glazing, which is where it's praising you, kind of
Yeah.
it's giving you unwarranted praise.
Yeah.
And I just decided to do a test where I gave it a prompt and I said, like, well, tell me what you think about this Call of Cthulhu scenario idea. I said that the concept of it was that the investigators are cursed to live very boring lives where they have to be accountants and fill out tax forms, and that the premise of the game is just incredibly boring, and that you spend the entire time role playing, filling out a tax form. Every time that you want to put a number in a box, you have to roll to see whether you got the
Is it
number.
a 7? Yeah.
And that the horror of the game came from how incredibly tedious it was. And I gave
That's
this
too close to
idea
home.
to Chat GPT, and it said, "Dan, this is brilliant. You have really got this. Is the boldest idea I've ever seen. This is genius." And I was like, "Wow!" I mean, that was
Yeah, that's
it was very eye opening because it's very easy, because it's sort of like when it's telling you what you want to hear, it's very easy to let your ego kind of blind you to, well, this isn't real. This isn't real. This is
yeah.
not a real person. It's not a real opinion. Uh,
I shouldn't
and
even
it,
value it as an opinion is sort of is
yeah,
where I fall off. Like it's sort of this, it's an interesting like sounding board. Like, but at the same time, like my example of this is like I didn't even pose a question, and its immediate response was like, "That is a great question," and
mm,
my response was like, "That wasn't a goddamn question." So
right,
I don't
yeah,
understand what we're doing here anymore.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
Ultimately, I found that it's useful in getting me just to think about things.
yeah.
And if I present an idea and it says yes or no, I like it, I don't like it. And this is now I'm talking about talking to Claude, because
Hmm.
I've switched over, and Claude is much more honest about things, and it'll tell you this is I ran the same experiment with Claude, and it was like, let me be honest with you, people are
Are
not
you
gonna
sitting
people
down?
there's going to be a riot at the table where people cannot get up fast enough because this is a horrible idea. And I was like, okay, thank you. I mean, this is what I wanted to hear, and I did not prompt it. I did not like.
You didn't tell it to be
I
bad
didn't
to
tell it
yeah,
like
yeah.
be really skeptical of this. I just, without any sort of guidance of what the answer I wanted was. I just But ultimately, it's really my own sense of what's good or bad that I'm that's going to make the decision. But sometimes just by bouncing it off of, you know, well, another person would be great, but I don't really have another person who would be willing to spend hours and hours doing this. I could maybe get someone to spend half an hour listening
Sure.
to stuff, but not as much time as I would want to be doing it for. Um, I find it useful. I do think that you still need to keep in mind that this is not a real person and that this machine, it cannot think, it can't,
Hmm.
doesn't have opinions. It doesn't really, like, it'll say I like something, but it doesn't actually have the capacity to quote unquote like something. And to kind of always remind myself to kind of do like a sanity check, or like take a step back and remember what's actually going on here. And it is good at some tasks. And I will say, so I used to be in this writing group.
Hmm.
This was when I lived in New York, and I also took a writing class. And when I took this class, I thought, like, well, here I am in New York City taking a writing class, and I thought, like, I wonder if these are all going to, if it's going to be a class full of just like these amazing writers. And well, just cut to the chase. It was not. It was
Aw.
the writing was, for the most part, incredibly awful. And also my writing group. I mean, my writing group was much better. This was a group of people I personally knew, and we
Okay,
would
okay.
share each other. We would share our writing samples with each other and critique them. However, I would say that when I have asked for critique from Claude, the critique that it's giving me is better than most of the human critiques that I've gotten. It's not as good as the very best human critiques,
Yeah.
but it's better than like 80% at least, I would say. And then when it comes to the writing that the AI does, it's very bland. But like when I took this writing class, I mean, some of these uh, works that people turned in were just they're just abysmal. I mean, it was
Just don't hold back. They were terrible.
really
Yeah.
awful stuff. I mean, it was sort of like a what are you thinking? There's one,
Did
oh my
someone write the
gosh.
accountant thing? Did someone like seriously like?
No, no. I mean, there is one thing that I hesitate to even
Probably shouldn't
mention
mention it, but
because
it's yeah.
it's something that if you wrote it today would get you canceled a million times over.
Gotcha.
And this guy really liked pushing people's buttons, and
Gotcha. So
it was
provocative
just
for the
a
sake of being
symphony
provocative. Yeah.
of awfulness. I'll just put it that way.
Ooh, I like that.
And yeah, and it's sort of like if I had to choose between reading that and reading some kind of like
Bland AI
schlock
thing.
that AI
Yeah.
was putting out, I think I would rather read the AI slop,
Yeah, and
than
that I feel like that is 100% where the state of the field is, right? What in sort of the work that I do, and just thinking about what AI is currently, right? Who knows? 10 years from now, people might listen to this and be like, "Well, Steven just was 100% wrong. My AI robot is my best friend, and he's cool." But like, or 5 years, who knows how fast it'll be? Right now, they're falling downstairs, so maybe not that fast. But the idea I think is, you know if you start from the place that AI is a tool, the next question is what is the tool good for? And then the follow-up question is what can it, what's the output of it and my relationship to that output? And that forces you to think, am I a novice? Am I an expert? Can I actually evaluate this? Am I just going to like the ego boost? So I'm going to use the thing that makes me feel the best. And all of these are the right questions, I feel like. But that isn't the same as don't use it ever. It's like instead it's, well, what is the purpose of it? And I like sort of the idea of, well, there should be limits. And some communities I think it's perfectly reasonable to have these guardrails, to want sort of some bespoke, um, only human hands have touched this content or material, because I think that's needed. But at the same time, that can't be everything. And I think being able to sort of acknowledge that is something that's important, because I don't like the idea that you have to either be this, what I call like this AI alarmist that think AI is going to ruin everything, or this AI zealot that think AI is going to make everything like 10 times better, because none of those extremes are simply incorrect. But yeah, so I think with that, thanks Dan for the conversation. This was super fun. I
yeah.
got to learn a little bit more about your journey as an artist, and we agreed for the most part that sometimes AI is okay, but sometimes it just makes crap, and we have to deal with it.
Yep. You gotta keep your wits about you when you're using it.
Yeah, keep your wits about you. Exactly.